Hi there, Sierra owners. Today in your 2012 GMC Sierra 2500, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Air Lift's LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs. Before you install your airbags, you want to make sure you take a measurement of your factory ride height, because this is ideally where we want our vehicle to be at all times. So here at the back, we're at about 43 inches. We're then going to go check our front. And in the front, we're measuring about 39 3/4 inches. We've now got about 1,000 pounds of water here that we're going to place in the back of our truck, and we're going to see how our factory suspension handles it. So I'm going to put this in here now, and we'll see where we're at. And now with all this weight in the back of our vehicle, we've dropped down to 41.5 inches, so 1.5 inches less with all this weight in the back than where we were at before. Now I guarantee you when we go to the front's also going to be lifted up. So what this does is it causes the tires at the front, the geometry of the suspension is going to change, which is going to cause you to have less tire road contact. So you're going to have decreased performance there. It's also going to affect your braking performance because of the less surface area you have on your tire contact to the road as well. And your headlights are also going to be aimed up towards the sky. And sure enough, when we come here to check the front, we're 1/2 inch higher. And while that may not seem like much, 1/2 inch on your headlights, because the further the distance they go out, the further they're going to be up, is actually quite substantial, and you'd be surprised how much of your visibility you lose at night when you've got the front end just a little bit higher. We've now got our airbags installed, and I've placed the weight in the back of our truck once again. I've aired the bags up. Let's recheck our ride height. And with our airbags installed now, we're sitting just under 43 inches, so we're basically right back to that factory ride height. We're less than 1/16 of an inch from where we're supposed to be. And in the front, we're going to recheck as well. We're right back to where we started at 39 3/4 inches, which means our headlights are going to be pointed in the correct direction, and the geometry of our suspension is going to be correct, giving us the best contact between the road and our tires, so we can ensure that we're going to have optimal handling and braking performance, regardless of what we're hauling behind us. We've now loaded up our vehicle with about 1,000 pounds worth of water weight, and we're going to take it out on our test course, and we're going to see how it handles. So we're going to come into our uneven bump section first. And you can feel how it's throwing us side to side a little bit. It does kind of not want to spring back as quick as I'd like it to, because you can see it's really kind of throwing us around a little bit here. We're now coming into the normal bump section where it's kind of like simulating a speed bump in a parking lot. And every time we go over in the back, you can really feel it dip back down pretty heavy. Now we're going to go over to our slalom. We're going to see how it affects us in some evasive maneuvers. Oh boy, yeah, and I don't want to do it too much here. You can feel the weight, how it wants to slide us to one side, almost wants to lean as we turn. So in the bump sections, it didn't feel too bad. The suspension on this truck's pretty stiff. But there in the slalom, it gets a little sketchy when you're really having an evasive maneuver. It kind of wants to roll the body pretty hard. So let's get back in, get the airbags on, and then we'll hit the test course again and see where we're at. We've got our airbags installed now, and we're going to head back out on the test course. We've loaded up the back of the vehicle again with our 1,000 pounds of water weight, and we're going to go into our uneven bump section first. And I can already tell that with the bags installed here, the suspension does feel much stiffer. It's not an uncomfortable amount of stiffness, but it is definitely noticeable. I can tell that on our uneven bumps here that we don't have as much rocking back and forth coming off of each bump. It returns to a straightness much faster, but it is just a little bit stiffer. So now we're going to go into the straight bumps, which is kind of like your speed bumps you'd have at an apartment complex. And the front feels nice and soft like it did before, and in the back I can definitely tell it is stiffer than it was before. The stiffness is a little bit uncomfortable, but it does keep our vehicle right where we need to be much faster. We don't have as much bouncing up and down in the back. Let's head over to our slalom now, where I expect we're going to have drastic increase in performance. And now in our slalom, we're going to start turning, and oh yeah, this is really where you're going to notice it. We got 1,000 pounds back there, and I don't feel like I'm being thrown around at all. It's still noticeable you're hauling that weight when you go over the bumps due to how the airbags are stiff, and you do feel that weight going up and down. But man, in an evasive maneuver situation, I would feel so much more comfortable driving now than I did before. So in the end of our test course driving with no airbags versus with airbags, loaded up with 1,000 pounds of water, my overall feeling of the system is that it's going to be fantastic if safety is what your biggest concern is. Over on the slalom, I had much more confidence in the control I had in the vehicle. I just felt like I could take those turns and the weight in the back wasn't flinging me around. I just really felt like we had a good grip on the road. Now, when we came into our bump section there with the airbags installed, it did seem a bit stiffer. It was not as comfortable as a ride as it was with no airbags. But to me, we're going over a big bumpy course here. We've got all these set up in a row. Out on the road, you're going to hit the occasional pothole. You know, it's one little minor dip of discomfort is definitely worth it to me, in my opinion, on how much safer I feel, especially in those evasive maneuvers. Now, there are other suspension enhancement systems out there, such as Timbrins, which also replace your jounce bumper. They're just a larger hard rubber bumper that is somewhat similar to your jounce bumper, but has better properties as it's designed to squish and act with your suspension system to work with it. What's nice about the Timbrins is that there's no maintenance. You never have to worry about air, checking them, because with your airbags here, they do fluctuate slightly with temperature. As temperature goes down, pressure is going to go down slightly. As it goes up, it'll go up slightly. You don't have to worry about any of that with Timbrins. They're never going to leak. But what I will say is they do have quite a bit rougher ride in comparison with airbags. Now, your airbags can be stiff if you air them up to high PSI levels, but you often don't need to go above 40 pounds for most loads. And at your lower levels, it's going to be much smoother of a ride than a Timbrin system. So you can look at it this way. With the Timbrins, they're going to be working regardless if you have a load in the vehicle or not. If you have a load, though, the Timbrins are going to be compressing to help support the load. If you have no load, then the Timbrins aren't going to compress as much, so any impacts that you hit on the road are going to travel through those into the cab of the vehicle and you're going to feel it more. Whereas with our airbags here, since we can adjust it, we only get the increased stiffness on our airbags when we've got it loaded down real high with a lot of air in our bags. We unload our truck, remove the air back down to the minimum of 5 PSI, and it feels like a factory truck again. And this is what our airbags look like when they're installed. They replace your factory jounce bumpers and install between your rear axle and your frame. The airbags are adjustable between 5 and 100 PSI and offer up to a 5,000 pound load carrying capacity. Each one can be aired up individually, left and right, so you can also adjust for offset loads. It's a double convoluted design, which you can see here. We've got the lower and upper chambers there where our air goes, and this helps increase the burst pressure of the bag by increasing its durability. You'll also see roll plates on the top and bottom, and this will help offset for body roll and support the airbag to further increase the durability of the airbag. One of the nice things about airbags is that they have constant contact between your frame and your axle, unlike your factory jounce bumper, which hangs down but has a gap between the axle. So with your factory jounce bumper, you get no support until your suspension's bottomed out, where our airbag here is going to get support throughout its entire length of travel. It's also going to be adjustable. Seems like your vehicle's soft. You can stiffen it up a little bit to help keep it from bouncing too much. And if you've overinflated it, you can always let a little bit of air pressure out to help soften the ride up too if you've made it too stiff. You'll inflate your airbags using the manual inflation valves in the back. You'll have one for the left and one for the right. If you desire, you can purchase a T here at etrailer.com and route these lines together to a single fitting so you can air them both up simultaneously. This is more convenient and a lot faster for airing up your airbags, but you do lose the side-to-side leveling support. We'll begin our installation underneath the vehicle by removing the jounce bumpers on each side. You can use a pry bar or flat-bladed screwdrivers to pop those out. You'll find your jounce bumper just above your rear axle. Just take your screwdriver, pop it in there, and just work the jounce bumper out. Once you got it so far, it might be easier to use 2 screwdrivers, so you can kind of get a little bit out, stick your next one in there, get it down a little bit further, and then just kind of rinse and repeat until you can get it all the way out of there. We'll do that on the other side as well. We'll now need to remove a few bolts to get the brackets out of the way to make room for our lower bracket on our airbag, and there's also some up top for our upper bracket. On your axle, on the lower strike pad where your jounce bumper would hit, you'll have your brake line brackets. We'll remove the bolt in our bracket with a 13mm socket. We'll then repeat this for the other side, and on your passenger side, you'll also have another bracket like this on the front of the axle as well. So there's two on your passenger side. Once you've got both of those out, on the driver's side again, but on the frame rail above the axle, we'll need to remove the bolt here that's holding our parking brake cable in place. We'll use the same size socket to remove it. Now that you've got it out, we'll just moving this aside. We just need to be able to maneuver it out of our way. We can now pre-assemble our airbags, take the roll plates, place them on top, lining up the large hole with the offset hole where our air fitting is going to go, and the two holes that will attach our bracket to it. Take the air fitting and thread it in to the offset hole, and then tighten it down using an 11mm socket. You want to make sure you get at least a couple of the threads that are covered in sealant threaded down into the airbag. We'll then take the upper bracket, set it in place, lining up the cutout there with your air fitting, and then lining up the holes in the bracket with the holes in our airbag. And then we're going to use the smaller beveled screws to attach it. We can then tighten them down with a 7/32 Allen key. We can then flip our airbag assembly over, and on the bottom we're going to place on our roll plate and then line up our lower bracket. We want to make sure that the angled edge here is the same side as our air fitting at the bottom there. And then we'll use the same hardware to attach the lower bracket. We'll now need to get additional clearance between our axle and the frame. We're using a pole jack since we're on a lift to lift up the vehicle to get that extra clearance, but you could use a floor jack at home. We're just putting it on the bottom of our hitch to lift it up. We can now put our airbag into position, so you'll want to work it up underneath your hoses. You may need to push some of those out of the way. You want to make sure that you don't pinch any of your brake lines when getting it into position. We're going to get our lower roll plate. We're going to get our lower bracket positioned on top of the strike plate. It is a tight fit on the strike plate there, but it will go on there. On our bottom bracket, we've got two holes here in the side. We want to line those up with the holes that are in our strike plate. You can see that it's lined up there. This way we know that our lower bracket's in the correct position. Now at this point you would normally put your upper hardware in, which is the U-bolts that you see here. They would slide over the top of the frame and come down through the holes here in the top bracket. But since we have a gooseneck hitch installed, the bracket for the gooseneck hitch is in the way, so we can't use the U-bolt hardware. That's okay, because there are holes here in the center. And what this is for is you take a 5/16 drill bit, drill through the frame, and they've included self-tapping screws, which you'll know you have the screw, because it'll have a little slit in it, like you see there, to attach the upper bracket. There's one of these holes on each side of our upper bracket. So before we drill these out real quick, we are going to move down to our lower bracket and put this hardware in place just to make sure that our lower bracket stays all lined up while we're doing some drilling. So the carriage bolts will just slide down through the slots. Your lower bracket clamp will go on the carriage bolts. And on the bottom of the carriage bolts, we're going to place a flat washer followed by a lock nut. We can then snug those down using a 9/16 socket. We want to make sure that we tighten them down evenly going back and forth. And we're really just looking to snug it down at this point, just to keep it from moving while we got our upper hardware installed. A little bit of spray lubricant can help to drilling process go a little faster, and we're just going to drill straight up into the frame. Now that we've got the hole drilled out here on the back side, we're going to put the bolt in, our self-tapping screw here. You'll know it's a self-tapper because of the little slit that's cut out there in the bottom. And we're going to use a 9/16 socket to run this in. Once we've got the bolt in, we're then going to repeat the process to drill out the hole on the front side in the middle, right over here on the other side of our bracket, and then we'll put the bolt in on that side as well. We can then go back and torque all of our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. We're going to do our upper bolts as well as our lower carriage bolts. Now for our upper parking brake cable that we had removed the bracket up there to clear our upper bracket, there is a bracket that comes in your kit. This would attach to the upper U-bolt. So when you would go to put the hardware on for your upper U-bolts, this would actually just slide on first, and you would slide it around that bracket. Since we're not using the U-bolts, because we have a gooseneck hitch installed, if we look up at our upper bracket here, the hole where our U-bolt would slide through doesn't have anything in it since we didn't use the U-bolts, and our parking brake cable's right here, so we'll just use the zip ties that come in our kit to secure it to this hole. We can now go back and torque down all of our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. We can now reinstall the brake line brackets onto our lower bracket from our airbag. The two holes there will have one threaded hole and one regular hole. The regular hole will line up with the tab here on the bracket, and that will make the other hole in our brake line bracket line up with the hole in our lower bracket to thread our hardware in. We're going to be using the shortest bolt that comes in our kit with a flat washer on it, and just threading it right into our lower airbag bracket. We're going to be tightening it down using a 13mm socket. We can then repeat that process here on our passenger side. The only difference between our passenger side and our driver's side is that there's no upper bracket we have to deal with for our parking brake cable. And our brake line that we have here, there's going to be another bracket on the opposite side. And this is for the parking brake cable, but it's down here below. And it installs just like the lower bracket. There's a threaded hole and a hole for the little thing to line up, and you just run that bolt in. Also, we'll have a heat shield that we're going to be putting on this side to keep the heat from our exhaust away from our airbag. To put this on, take your heat shield, bend the center tabs in like this. You can then take those and bend them again back out, and this will give us our air gap that we need for our heat shield. The clamps that come in our kit, we're going to use those to strap it on. Loosen up your clamps fully so you can slide it around your exhaust, and you can bring it back in on itself and then tighten it back down. We're just going to be putting a couple turns on it here just to keep it in place. We're going to do the same thing with our other one. Then we can take our heat shield. We're going to take one of the clamps, slide it up, put it over our ear that we had bent there on the heat shield, and kind of get it into the position where we want it. We're going to do the same thing with our bottom one. And then while holding it all in place, we're going to come back and tighten down our straps. We can do that with an 8mm socket. And I like to take the heat shield and just kind of bend it back a little bit like that. But you want to make sure that you do have a gap between the shield and the exhaust. All that we have left to do now is to route our air lines from our airbags to the back of the vehicle so we have a place to air them up. I'm going to route those lines now for each side, and then I'll show you the path that I took to get from the bag to the back of the vehicle. Real quick before I route the lines, I did want to show you that the hose that comes in your kit here is going to have ends pre-attached to them where we'll inflate them. So You're going to need to cut this airline hose in half so you've got an equal amount to run both the driver and passenger side. So we're just going to kind of stretch it out here. Try not to kink the hose when we're undoing it, but you can see here it likes to coil itself back up. Now that we've got it separated out and we found the center of our lines, we're going to cut them in half. You want to make sure you use a pair of hose cutters to ensure that you get a nice, clean, square cut. This is important for sealing properly inside the quick connect fittings on your airbags. These just poke right into those, so there's really easy installation. Just shove it right in. Here you can see our airline hose. We just poked it right into the quick connect fitting. It just pushes in. I like to push and pull in and out a few times just to make sure it's fully seated. From there, we just route it towards the back following our factory wiring, because we want to make sure we avoid anything moving, like our steering and suspension parts, and we also want to make sure we avoid anything hot, such as our exhaust. If we follow factory wiring, we know it's already routed in a way where it's going to be avoiding these things. So we just stay on this factory wire loom all the way to the back, going up over the frame rails as we go, until we come out here at the back. I went ahead and left the excess in place just in case the customer ever needs it for future repair, so I just looped it up, and then we attached it to a bracket that we installed here. This is a short no-drill bracket, which you can pick up here at etrailer.com. We chose to use this so we didn't have to drill into anything on our vehicle. We didn't really want to have to modify the bumper or anything. So this bracket here simply just clamps around your hitch, and see how it sticks down here a little bit? It gives us a point where we could drill out to install our air fitting ends. We drilled out using a 5/16 socket in order for these to pass through. We then just tighten them down using the included hardware. You'll have a nut that you'll put on first and a star washer. Slide it through your bracket, then place on your rubber washer, flat washer, and nut. On the passenger side, it's fairly similar, except you see here we don't have any factory wiring right here where we start. So we actually go slightly forward first and zip tie it to one of the holes on our bracket here to keep it away from our exhaust and the heat shield. And from there, it does curve back, going above the heat shield for our exhaust. We hit our factory wiring around here, but we do stay above the heat shield all the way to about here, and then we can start attaching it to the factory wiring that runs along the frame rail. Once we get towards the back here, there is wiring that runs across as well over towards our driver's side, so we just zip tied it to that factory wiring as well, going across until we come out over here. We can now air up our bags and check for leaks. We're using some soapy water and spray all of our fittings and verify that there's no presence of air bubbles. So you'll see these bubbles here. These are normal. This is just from the soap. What we're looking for is reoccurring bubbles that continually come out. Since we don't see anything here on our fittings, we know we're good, so we're going to move on and check the rest of our fittings over at our airbags. With no bubbles present, we can load our truck up as desired, set the airbags for that particular load, put our caps back on our fittings, and we're ready to hit the road. And that completes our installation of Air Lift's LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs on our 2012 GMC Sierra 2500.